So it's Friday night with Byline Times, the last Friday night with Byline Times of 2021. And we're delighted to be joined by our producers, Kaylin on the sofa here, and George behind the screen, controlling everything. So, honey, we're going to look over some of the amazing output you guys have done over the last year. It's quite incredible, the number of places you've been to, the stories you've covered. But let's go a little bit back before the beginning of last year, or this year, and it's just at the end of 2020, and you guys were one of the first people to cotton on to something now which has kind of obsessed us all, which is the scandemic movement. And it was way back, I think, last September, September 15 months ago, that you first interviewed a now disgraced nurse, isn't she, Kate Shiromani, who was and still is promulgating these scary conspiracy theories. Shall we go and have a look at that and then talk about it?
Injected with all AIDS. I watched her little body convulse. There is something else which we haven't found out yet.
That's to do with the QAnon movement.
The group that you're part of, is being linked with the English Democrats, or as you said, you kind of all share opinion.
Black friend, but when I see the police taking one knee at a Black Lives Matter rally, I'm disgusted. When I can find where the nurses and the doctors were allowed to end people's lives was the nurses of the third.
Where is the evidence for what you're saying, Kate, around you likening this to Auschwitz and the Holocaust, which I think a lot of people will find deeply offensive? Where is the evidence?
I don't care if they find it offensive.
So, Hardy and Kaylin, you got a bit of grief for that video, didn't you? That you were somehow spreading the lies and not challenging them, but you found it very difficult to challenge them, didn't you?
So we didn't actually get any grief at the time, because in a way the film was so ahead of its time. It was actually many, many months afterwards, in the middle of this year, when Kate Shiromani and various other anti-lockdown and anti-vaxxer representatives were appearing in these big rallies in Trafalgar Square. And so there's a lot more media attention on them anyway from the mainstream outlets. And we sort of put our video out there again. And that's when a few, I have to say, on the whole, people were really positive as to how we had interviewed her. There are only a few that said, you're giving her publicity, why would you want to do that? But it was, when you look at the film, it was very, I thought we took a good approach.
But let's look at the next clip.
Aged 18, he's the star of the school and even gets cast in a production of Richard II. But Boris is too lazy or too preoccupied with other stuff to turn up. So he spends the entire period of rehearsals doing something else, whilst all the other actors turn up. Boris Johnson, star of the show, Richard II, the biggest part in Shakespeare, does not turn up. And on the day of the performance, he does turn up. But before the performance begins, he gets some little post-it notes, posts them around the courtyard where they're performing it, and puts his lines on it. Now, if you fuck up as badly as that, you might expect consequences. But Boris Johnson thought he could get away with everything. Having screwed up the production of Richard II, Boris Johnson's called to the headmaster's office. Boris wants to be head boy. He thinks he deserves it. After all, he's Boris Johnson. But he doesn't become head boy. And the reason he doesn't become head boy is because finally Eton has caught on to who he is. His headmaster has worked out that he's a lazy, easy rider who doesn't want to learn his lines or put in the work. So they don't make him head boy. Boris Johnson gets the hump. And by all accounts, he's had the hump about it ever since.
So, talking about lies and conspiracy theories and all that, here we have somebody who's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, his track record in history, and this is our most successful video this year, isn't it, Kaylin?
This was the biggest hit we've had on our YouTube channel. It was really early days, one of the first videos we did. But it was also at a time where the media weren't really digging into Boris like they are now, and he wasn't this centre core subject about, what makes him tick and all of his different policies. This was kind of like in the early days where we were just sort of criticising on a surface level his reaction to COVID. Yeah, so Otto was the perfect person to do it because he's done the most research into Boris probably than anybody else. So he knew exactly what was going on. So yeah, it was an amazing video. It really resonated with so many people.
And keeps on resonating. And it's interesting, Hardy, in a way, for 2 years, because of the starting with the Vote Leave campaign, our journalistic background, been covering the Prime Minister's and his campaign's tendency to lie. And now, a year on, what are people talking about?
Well, now all the mainstream media outlets are talking about his incompetence, his lack of integrity, and why he needs to stop being Prime Minister very soon. And so at this point, we argue that it's actually not now the time to necessarily just focus on his personality. It's the forces that got him there, which will still be in place even if he leaves. So it's important to understand who this leader is, who seemingly has been at the heart of so much chaos, but the story can't stop there. It's a much bigger story.
This is why we're what the papers don't say, because they'll be telling you just get rid of Boris Johnson, everything will change. But it won't if you get Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, because the same force are in power. Okay, let's look at the next clip.
Yeah, you know, if I could turn the clock back, would I have voted leave? Of course not. I don't want to stay in. You know, it's for the future of my family, not so much me. You know, I'm coming to the end of my career. But to go forward, I think me and many others have perhaps made a mistake. I just thought there'd be a better future for myself and for my children and my children's children, to become independent, to have our own fishing grounds, to be able to be independent, to be able, you know, for Europe to rely on us. The reality is we're now January 20. We've yet to send a consignment to Europe from Brixham. It's just been an absolute nightmare. I think I was sort of taken along on the ride that we were all on, with the bus going around. You know, we were going to save £350 million per week that we're throwing into Brussels, that we're going to have this free trade, and Europe were going to be desperate for our fish because we'd have control of it all and we'd be in control of our own destiny.
The key is we've got our fish back. They're now British fish and they're better and happier fish for it.
Very disappointed with the comments. Rees-Mogg, you know, happy fish, please.
This was really, for me, an iconic film that Byline TV did. It sort of was the first piece of reporting that really put us on the map.
Yes, it was 6th of January, wasn't it? And so hard Brexit, which we can now say is a hard Brexit, had just happened. We'd left the EU 6 days before.
It was a huge hit straight away. Like, it was basically like 24 hours, it obtained something like 1 million views, because A, no one had seen really reporting like this in the UK before. That was just run and gun, someone just speaking to heart without any narration around it, without a reporter standing there telling you how to deal with the information. But B, it was literally like 72 hours after Brexit had kicked in, just as the media were trying to even understand it. And immediately, the front lines who were bearing the brunt of what was happening were the fishermen who were exporting directly to the EU. Before it hit the farmers and what we did next, it were these people. And A, people didn't expect any of this. They didn't expect it to be as bad as it was, which the video conveys. He says 90% of his business was going down. And B, they didn't expect someone to say that they regretted voting Brexit on camera. It's the first time that had really happened as well. And it resonated so much to the point where The Guardian even wrote about this again in a big feature 3 weeks ago, him specifically.
Do you know what I find really interesting about this film is when you look into Ian Purkis's face, you see a conflicted man, because obviously he had voted to leave the EU and it was something that he had had conviction about. And here he was saying to Byline TV that he regretted it, but you can see etched on his face that even that is not an easy thing to say or to get on board with, and I see a man very conflicted, and I think conveying that really is something symbolic about the whole Brexit project.
Also Byline TV, that you did a brilliant work of filming there, but also it's quite a bit of investigative journalism. You to track him down, wasn't it? He appeared in a New York Times article, and you tracked him down, you managed to go and interview him. That's good journalism, Caleb.
Yeah, it was this hunt in the first few days when Brexit kicked in to find the core Brexiteers and the people who were involved in all those campaigns, or people that were just speaking out against it in those sort of industries. I mean, most of them didn't want to appear on camera. They knew that they would get lots of negative comments. They knew that they would probably get a lot of people, you know, laughing and things like that. But he genuinely lost a huge part of his business, and he wanted people to know how it was affecting people. He knew what he was up against. He knew that it would you know, bring a lot of grief
from both sides, because you get the leavers saying you're a betrayer, and then unfortunately, a lot of Remainers saying, ha ha, you deserve this.
But the key thing is in the style of the filming, the style of the report, it lacks judgment.
Yeah.
It's just sort of presenting his story and how his views have changed or been shaped by what he's experienced since Brexit. So I think that coming at it through that lens is really important on issues like this.
That gets back to the Kate Shevamani story, is sometimes you have to let people speak and let them say their craziness, or in this case, their sadness and their reason. And kudos to Kaylin for a year's hunt for all these, through various industries, all the way to turkey farmers and pig farmers, of people impacted by Brexit. So let's keep on moving and see some more.
100,000 people now lost to coronavirus in this country. How do you visualize that? How do you put that in any context that's meaningful about people, about society, about life? Who was the person that should have been sitting here? Who was number 5,231? Did they have kids that badly missed them now? What were their plans for this summer? Who should have been sitting here? Who should have been sitting on all of these seats? This stadium can hold 10,000 people. Well, 10 times that we've now lost. People who should be here. 100,000 people. That otherwise could have been here.
So this was obviously the awful milestone that we passed as a country. More than 100,000 people have died from COVID-19 at this point. Caitlin, how did you think about conveying the gravity of that?
Well, it started with my own version of it, which was trying to understand how to visualize that myself. We were looking at, I think we were at 97,000 deaths, and it was growing really, really quickly. And I knew that we'd hit 100 that week, probably by Thursday. This was Monday. And I was talking to George, and we were saying, like, what even is that? And we both realized that everyone's been to a stadium, everyone's been to a concert, everyone's been to a football match or something like that. And that's probably the closest way for people to understand just the scale of what had happened. So I called up a bunch of stadiums and we went and we said, this is, you know, these are people who should be here. We overlaid the sounds of people cheering and then disappearing. I think it really hit home. It went very viral on Twitter.
And that is part of journalism's job, isn't it? To convey things to people in a way they emotionally understand. And now, sadly, we're over 140,000 deaths, and with Omicron rampant across the country in London as we speak, sadly there may be many more. Okay, let's move on. What's the next clip, George?
All of my guests have in some way been a part of this report.
Racism exists.
So they whitewashed your findings. They took all the race out of the...
I think that's why it went down to 4 pages instead of, you know, a larger section.
And if number 10 was to call you again and say...
They won't. Believe me, they won't. They come up with the findings, and it was just about finding and manipulating the facts to fit those findings.
Systemic racism does exist, and let's get back to trying to figure out how to solve it. You'll notice none of that is in the report.
And when they stopped more young white men than young black men, they found that more young white men had drugs on them.
If you're a black Londoner, you're 7 times more likely, 7 times, 700% more likely to be stopped and searched than if you're a white Londoner.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the institution or anything, according to this report. It's because young black Londoners are more likely to be involved in crime and carry drugs, and you know, and really that's why there's a mistrust.
Black people are no more likely to commit crime than anyone else.
Yeah.
And yet they don't sort of put that in the same sentence as the fact that stop and search is disproportionately carried out.
So Hardy, the culture wars, another great contribution, by the way, by Dawn Butler MP, who works a lot with us, is one of great contributor to Byline TV.
So the Saw report was into ethnic and racial disparities between different groups in society and, looking at their outcomes. And I mean, across the board, it came in for widespread condemnation, not just within the media and political campaigners, but from lots of experts in their fields, whether that be in education, criminal justice, or in health. Jonathan Portes, the professor of economics and public policy at King's College London, one of our regular writers, he did an analysis of the report and said essentially you can't find something you're not looking for. So the premise of this report, the headlines were reported that this report said that structural inequality, structural racism in Britain isn't really a thing. The differences between groups and the outcomes can be explained by other factors not to do with race. Jonathan Portes' analysis was, to begin with, the people who put this report together were not asking the questions about structural racism, which perhaps would have presented a fuller picture. But there was also a really memorable phrase in this report, which again I just thought was a sort of watershed moment, where a section of it described slavery and how part of what should be taught to students in schools should be the Caribbean experience.
Celebrating the Caribbean experience.
Or some notion that it wasn't just about repression and slavery. There was some spirit that the enslaved people had that was a good thing and should be taught. But it was widely ridiculed, this report, and a key pillar of the culture war, I think, which sort of fell flat.
Well, let's keep a mark on those culture war moments, because I think it's 3-0 or maybe 4-0 in the culture wars. What's the next clip, George?
Viruses. By numbers, there are many more viruses on Earth than all other organisms combined, including bacteria, and by a long way. They come in all shapes. You should recognize this one. Ebola, for example, is an ultra-microscopic thread, a tiny worm of doom. Norovirus looks more like a ball, and just 100 of them is enough to infect you. Now, how about that for a poison that kills round about 200,000 people a year? And they can infect all life on Earth, from humans to animals to plants to bacteria and even each other. But how do viruses work? Let's take a look at these two. This one infects bacteria. It's a bacteriophage. It has a head or capsid which holds the genetic material inside, and then a tail section with tail fibers. And here's how it works. The little spaceship approaches a bacterium, lands on it, and then by contraction physically injects its genetic material into that cell. Now that genetic material then commands the machinery of the cell to make more and more copies of the virus until the bacterium blows up under the strain, releasing an army of new viruses. Now, coronavirus is different. It's a ball that holds the genetic material inside, and these protein structures on the surface, well, they interact with the ACE2 receptors that are found all over our body's internal organs, heart, lungs. This makes the cell, this skeleton key, take the virus into the cell, where it makes copies of itself that are then excreted back out of the cell to go around the body. And because each time the virus gets copied, you can have errors creeping into the copies that make these variants, by luck, faster to infect or avoid the immune system's response or avoid vaccination efforts. And that is the battle that we are fighting now.
Yes, so science, that was early February 2021. There was a lot of misinformation around. We didn't know that much about the virus or this weird herd immunity strategy, which doesn't work with a novel virus without a vaccine. Yeah, journalism is a science too. I mean, we do rely on facts, and in a way we can't, we try to follow the science too, as a lot of journalists haven't, and our current Prime Minister and their cabinet seem to be diverging from. Okay, let's have a look at the next clip, George.
I remember when I got a message on Twitter from one of the features editors of British Vogue, and I had to ask Annison to read the message a few times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, to be alongside Jane Elliott and Professor Angela Davis is, I mean, I would have never imagined this, a small girl from Gibraltar who had grown up playing football on the beach in the Mediterranean Sea, to then end up on Vogue next to people who I looked up to. And, you know, they say you can't be who you can't see. So it's thanks to them who, you know, they've given me the power to speak up. And it gave me a lot of encouragement and hope that there will be people who will fight for justice. And I know that when my daughter grows up and when my family, you know, grows, there will be people who will stand up for us. Even if I'm not there, I know that there will be people who will take the lead and be the voice of those who need it the most. So my colleagues were very supportive and all over the moon and very happy and very proud as well. But my family especially, I think it was a big moment in our history. My father was born and raised in a slum in New Delhi. So to come from that to this is a huge turning point in our family's history. And it just goes to show again that it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your background is. If you're fighting for the truth, if you're fighting for justice, and if you're fighting for something you really believe in, people will listen to you.
So that's one of the great things, isn't it, working on Byline TV, especially during this pandemic. We've met some real heroes in the health service, and I'd include in that Dr. Meenal Viz, and our husband, Nishant Joshi. Thank you both.
My husband has farmed here, he was born here, and his family have farmed in this area for hundreds of years. This Brexit is the worst of all Brexits for agriculture, for industry, for fishing, and really for our finance sector as well. You know, all of that has been thrown under the Brexit bus.
It's gonna be difficult. It's definitely going to be difficult. Choppy waters ahead, I think.
Once these farming generations go, and they've already shrunk considerably in the last 20 years, once our farmers are gone, you're not going to have the expertise which is handed on from generation to generation. You know, they know what goes on in the land, and that is what we will lose, that expertise. And largely become like America, which will be that instead of being these cute British farms, it'll be just industrial factories, and we won't have these types of gorgeous places existing anymore.
Farming is vitally important because it produces the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. It's absolutely that simple. You know, we clean the air, we look after the environment, we all breathe. All the water is captured on farmland, trickles down into rivers, which fills reservoirs, which fills our homes with water, and all the food we eat is produced from farms. It's like, what we do is care for everybody. We care for the country, and we care for the countryside and the environment, and through that caring, we then care for everybody in the country.
So that was June 2021, and we'd had this Australian trade deal, wasn't it? So not only do we have the impact on supply chains and people trying to sell their goods to Europe being heavily impacted, we have this lowering of standards, don't we, by these trade deals, which sort of undercut British agriculture, its higher manifestation in the EU.
Well, this was the second wave of Brexit. The first wave was fishing. It was direct relationships with the EU. Now this is the whole world. One of the main promises for Brexit was these amazing trade deals we would all get. That's why all these farmers voted for it. You can see them in this video who regretted it. And it was showing the real actual human impact of it. Most of the news were just getting in talking heads on Zoom talking about it, people from Australia, government officials. No one could really understand what impact that was actually having on our farms in Britain. Going to these beautiful farms, having the farmers tell us how beautiful the British countryside is and how it can be, ruined, a lot like American agriculture where it's sort of mass produced and sort of ugly, is, I think, a good way to tell the story.
Yeah, and a continuing story of trade deals not offering us much money, in fact, losing money and undercutting our standards. George, let's see the next clip.
Why did this photo of Priti Patel cause such a stir? The image of the Home Secretary attending what was widely reported on social media to be an immigration raid caused outrage, with many questioning the tastefulness of making a photo op out of such an event. In fact, the photo was not taken at an immigration raid, but the arrest of a suspected people smuggler. and was intended as part of a publicity drive around the Home Secretary's new plan for immigration. And in many ways, it was classic Priti Patel. But it was also more than that. The symbolism of that photo opened up a discussion which is rarely had in today's culture war debates around British history and the Empire. Specifically, the experience of Asian immigrants from former colonies and how this background shapes their views on identity, policies such as immigration, and the future path of the UK.
With the first Indian origin Home Secretary ever in the UK, Right Honourable Priti Patel.
How can Priti Patel, herself the daughter of immigrants, take the hardline approach towards immigration that she does? The answer is complicated, but ultimately it's understandable. To many, Patel's politics are clearly surprising and at times abhorrent.
On that basis alone, I would actually support the reintroduction of capital punishment.
Abhorrent to those who might expect immigrants to hold certain liberal views on immigration. But to discover the truth, we need to dig deeper.
So that's one of my favourite videos of the year, partly because it's nuanced and the way you look at a very complicated character like Priti Patel with her background, avoiding those accusations that she should be of one political persuasion because she's got a Ugandan Asian background. But also, you look so stylish, Hardeep. I think that is kind of your look began to develop thanks to the team in that video.
Well, my old school 60s Bollywood look. Maybe. But, you know, I wanted to tell this story of Priti Patel or explore some of these issues around a figure like her for a while, actually, because as regular viewers will know, you know, from my own family background, my father's upbringing in East Africa and Kenya, there were lots of interesting dynamics I'd always known about, just grown up with, and I sort of saw in figures like Patel. But actually what the trigger point was this photo that was just sort of a very normal photo released by the Home Office, which was her attending as Home Secretary a raid by the NCA on suspected people smugglers. So they were going in, taking out, arresting people, and there was one image that was released as part of that, the publicity around it by the department, and it was her watching on as a man of colour was being arrested and taken out of his home. And what happened next was on social media, this picture provoked such a debate, and it was really quite nuanced and thought-provoking, and mainly the people of the British Asian heritage, also some people with East African Asian connections were commenting that who would have thought that a daughter of that generation would place herself in a photo where she's looking on at the arrest of a man of colour. There was some dynamic there that was so charged, and so I used it as the springboard. And I have to say that it was, you know, very much a collaboration between myself and George, and it's still one of the films we had the most. It was really meaningful for us because we just sat here for like a whole afternoon and really just thought about how to present this with nuance, you know, and lack of judgment, which is really hard when it's a figure like Priti Patel.
Yeah, and her policies have grown to be more and more extreme, as we know, by the end of the year. But yeah, you cannot deduce from that the individual. And I think what you're so brilliant at, and from your family background, partly that is knowing that empire, the history of empire, divides and rules inside ourselves as well as between communities. British always putting the Muslims up against the Hindus in India, and that continues in this post-imperial Britain. But look, let's move on and see the next clip.
Sadly, over the last sort of 24 hours, things have become slightly less civil. I was extremely intimidated.
Are you going to stand for those Muslim parents
now?
now?
You know what? I'm not going to stand. You shouting at me. The Muslim community of Batley and Spend deserve better than this. They deserve better than this.
We're the community. I'm asking you, are you going to support Muslim parents?
Do not walk away.
Because you don't want their children to learn about LGBT indoctrination. Are you supporting us, Kim? Kim, I'm here. Answer the question. Why are you running? Kim, I'm here to talk to you.
Kim is walking away.
Support Muslim parents who don't want their children to learn about...
I've been here 60 years of my life.
So speak to this gentleman.
Answer the man.
We are going to chase Labour at every step. We are going to chase Labour. We are going to out your lives. You are the colour of bread. He's right. The colour of blood. The colour of blood is what you are.
So June saw the Batley and Spen by-election, which was quite a contest, wasn't it? We had various people standing in that seat, formerly the seat of Joe Cox. What were some of the dynamics on the ground, and why was it so important that Byline TV be there to document them?
Was so charged. It was the first election that we had covered as Byline TV, and as soon as we arrived, we actually went with Don Butler just to see, knocking on doors, what the feeling was like in these towns. Are they shifting more Labour or more Tory? We didn't realise that it was charged until we got there. Immediately, as soon as we started filming with Dawn, there were George Galloway supporters. He was running in this campaign a really intense, very charged, sort of lots of rhetoric and things like that, whipping up lots of kind of anger in the communities. A lot of that was directed at Dawn. There were people shouting at us when we were filming with her in the States and things. It was very crazy. It was just crazy straight away. As soon as we went filming with her outside of a mosque, we saw George Galloway, we saw Kim Leadbeater, and just everyone knows what happened after that. It just all sort of erupted. We just happened to be there. There was lots of other media there as well. We put it out straight away, unfiltered, with no commentary, just this is the facts, this is what happened. She was chased out, her sister was murdered down the road. People were furious. The leader of the Labour Party was tweeting it. And it was just a complete mess. But I think what was quite good is we then went straight to the Labour headquarters and spoke to Kim and had her words just directly put out of what her version of events was and how she feels about it and how her sister would probably have felt about it. And it was just really powerful, I think. I'm glad that we were there though, because I don't think that would have been released otherwise. I don't think people would have known what had happened to Kim. It
was very aggressive. I remember you sending me the clip for approval.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite hear sort of these curses the guy was saying at the end. Of course, Galloway denied he was a supporter, and the guy said, you met me, you said I should be in politics. Got very contested politically, and we were accused of sort of going out there to dob in with a political agenda to support Keir Starmer and to undermine George Galloway. Can I assure viewers, we didn't. We had no idea that was going to kick off. It was relayed it very quickly, basic editorial oversights. We weren't taking sides.
Because the other context to this, if I remember rightly, was if the by-election, if it was lost by Labour, then there was some talk of a leadership challenge being triggered. Is that right?
Oh, more than that. I think they'd booked the offices and everything. We didn't discover this till after the event.
Of course, yeah.
But had Kim Leadbeater lost, then there would have been a challenge to Keir Starmer. And so the fact that he narrowly scraped through, some people feel that video may have made some difference to the results. We don't mind. We don't care either way. Our job isn't to swing elections. And so there's some fury at us on the left of, I won't say who, but accused, this isn't journalism, whatever this isn't journalism. No, it was plain journalism.
Let's take a look at the next clip.
It's been a nightmare to get drivers. You just can't. There just seems to be nobody around, and drivers are your tools, and at the minute it's getting harder and harder to find them. And it's just causing us chaos. It's had a massive impact. We've had a lot of our European drivers actually go back just due to paperwork, and it's just a lot easier to go back to their countries. We've had Spain, Portuguese and Czech Republic driver just go back home. It's easier for them paperwork wise, and it's just causing chaos. Our customers are our priority, and we work with a supermarket, so definitely without a doubt we're going to have a major shortage. Already our customers are struggling to get some products in from suppliers, Warburton, stuff like that, to dispatch out to the supermarkets. I just think it's only going to get worse, that there's going to be a major food shortage.
Well, I passed my test when I was 21. I was lucky, I managed to keep going all through COVID, and from a driver's point of view, the lockdown was lovely. There was no traffic on the roads. And pre-Brexit, when a trailer came off the ferry, we could pick it up and go straight away. Now it has to come off the ferry, then await customs clearance. And I've been sat around for 2 or 3 hours waiting for them to clear customs. And some of my colleagues have lost a whole day waiting for a trailer to clear customs before they can leave the key. And as an owner driver, I could put another vehicle on the road, but I can't find a driver for it, so I'm staying at one vehicle. The ferry operator I work for, they're crying out for hauliers all the time now. They just cannot find people to pull the trailers because people are struggling for drivers. I've got a son now who's 22, and I'm discouraging him from coming into this industry because he wants to take over from myself, and I've told him I don't think it's the thing to do at the moment. There's not a lot of future in it.
And so this was supply chain chaos. Everyone was wondering why there was no food on their supermarket shelves. Our leaders were saying it was because of other countries and it was happening all over the world. We spoke to the drivers, the people delivering it, who told us it was Brexit. It was one of the first people to say that on camera.
Yeah, and I remember you did an article for Byline Times, Why the Empty Shelves. There was also a sort of rumour put out, there was the pandemic, people were getting pinged on their apps, COVID. Now, there are no doubt supply chain issues thanks to COVID across the world, but this is particularly caused by lack of foreign drivers thanks to Brexit. So we helped expose that.
Yep.
What's next?
We are absolutely honoured to live close to where he was born. I've said thank you for being you. We're very proud of you. My kids have someone very special to look up to, and it's an honour to live beside where he's grown up.
I've just brought a couple of posters that children in the class that I work in have made. Very pleased that the children chose to do this in their free time. So I thought I'd bring them down and just make sure that they went up so that their efforts can be seen and the message can be spread. I work in a very multicultural school and the children are very much aware of some of the issues that Marcus Rashford has highlighted, both in terms of the anti-racism campaigns but also in terms of the school meal campaign, so he's a bit of a hero to those children.
Oh, this was it's really emotional watching this footage. I remember when we first saw it, just before it went online, it was so really nicely put together. So big credit to Caelan and George for that. And of course, this was during Euro 2020 when Marcus Rashford and two other players who were black missed penalties, and it was all of the fallout from that and the racist abuse they received. You went down to Manchester, the community where he was born and brought up and is still very connected to, and there was so much love. So it's quite a contrast between sort of the culture war rhetoric and then what happens on the ground. Lots of people really sticking up for him.
2-0 in the culture wars. Sur report, and then this attempt, Priti Patel saying people should be allowed to boo, if I recall, or she wouldn't take the knee. Boris Johnson said they had a right to boo people taking the knee, and then it all turned around. I thought it was an amazing moment in British culture to prove that, the people around are much less racist than the people in charge, especially in the media.
She personally is extremely arrogant and narcissistic. That's the feedback that anyone will give you if you talk to her for more than 15 minutes. And when someone has that level of self-belief, an unhealthy level of self-belief, they're never going to listen to anyone else when someone says you're wrong. And there have been times when I've said to her, you're wrong about something. And she will say either that I was stupid or that I'm arrogant. She'll often project onto me. Or another interesting thing that everybody does when they believe in conspiracies, so this is not just my mum now, is the more you argue with them, the more they see you as evidence that their worldview is correct.
So this was the interview we were talking about earlier. Kate Shemirani's son, Sebastian Shemirani, provided some really interesting insights into his mother, a very difficult woman to try to understand. Let's take a look at what's next.
I can remember as a child growing up in Birmingham, watching the television. My parents loved British sitcoms, and I always remember our house filled with the sound of laughter, and whether it was Love Thy Neighbour or Elaine Half Hot Mum or Benny Hill, Morecambe and Wise. My favourite was Tommy Cooper. I just remember those idyllic times sitting by the fire listening to my parents laugh. And I think I took that very much with me out onto the street. And I was a bit of a clown as a kid. But all that sort of ended one day when I was sort of playing alone outside my house. And I think I was bouncing a ball, just sort of innocent, just thinking that I was a little English boy playing around. And I saw this elderly white gentleman across the road from me. And he sort of stopped and looked at me and started walking towards me. And I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel like he was charging at me. I was sort of watching this man just slowly get closer and closer. And he sort of got really quite close. And then he sort of leaned in to my face. His face was like red and contorted and angry. And he said to me, "Get the fuck out of my country, you little black bastard." And stood there, glaring at me. And then stood up and walked away. And I sort of watched him walk away and thought, what did he mean? I was sort of puzzled by what he said. His country. I hadn't really understood the concept of the place where I was as a place that I didn't belong. But he said it was his country, not my country. And the clock started ticking, ticking, ticking. And then the bell went off. Maybe I don't belong here. And that's when I suddenly realized that maybe England wasn't supposed to be for me. And all these suddenly playful, idyllic ideas of being English sort of fell away. And I sort of split in two because, in a sense, that was the birth of my black consciousness, because I suddenly realized I was other, not English, but black. And it was a deeply uncomfortable moment. And one of the things that really stuck with me is I never said anything to anybody. Didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my friends, didn't tell my brothers or my sister. I just carried it with me.
This, I love talking to David Harewood. I mean, I think he's a great actor. But also that bit where culture and actor overlaps with the wider society. You know, his experiences of racism I found very, very moving. My adopted kid brother was black, and he experienced some of the same things and probably went through the same mental turmoil. And it's just that psychological, because he had a breakdown and he's very honest about his own mental health. I just find that mixture of the political, the psychological, the cultural, the arts is a really important area to keep on investigating. It isn't just hard news. Psychology and culture, they all connect, don't they?
And he's still investigating, and that was one of the really poignant moments of the interview when I was sat with this sort of Hollywood star who's much older than me, lots of gravitas, and his voice started to crack because he was really emotional about recalling his experiences. They're still with him, he's really worked through them, but he's someone who always investigates. And what was a real honour was at the end of the interview when he said, "It's about search for the truth. That's why I like what Byline Times really does. It's an honour to be here." And that's enough for me to go home and feel happy.
Yeah, thank you, David. What's next, George?
A couple of days ago, BBC came down to try and get an interview for live TV, and I was very surprised by the reaction that I received.
The price of a container pre-Brexit, because it's nothing to do with Brexit, pre-Brexit was £3,000 just over for one container. The same container containing the same goods cost £14,000 now.
I didn't even realise, because I only watched the clip once, that they had cut it. And I do think it's wrong for them to cut it. It's just, this is important to me, and I think people should know the truth about Brexit, which is it's very damaging to this country. And it's only going to get worse. My great-great-grandfather started this business over 100 years ago with a wheelbarrow full of fish. And we continue 100 years later. People expect everything to be done and delivered to them, whereas... I'm sorry, it is on its way, but unfortunately we're really short of drivers, and everything's been delayed by an hour or so because we've had to divide the Roundup. I apologise, and it should be with you shortly. Thank you. Bye. That's the fourth today and it causes stress. These can't be sent. The fisherman that usually sends most of his stock, 70%, to Europe, can no longer do that because of the paperwork involved, so he has to sell his fish for a lot less, because we pay a lot less for the fish than the Spanish and the Italians. Sea bass, sea bream, and I would say most restaurants have sea bass on their menu. It will come to a point where they will say, no more, we can't keep sending 100 grand's worth of fish whatever, on a vehicle, to have it rejected because it's been sat for 4 days.
So that was Mariella Gabbard in early October, and again, supply chain issues. But kudos to you, Kaylin. I mean, if I right, you shot that on your own, and Kaylin often shoots on his own, and edited it on the train back from Salford. Where was she? Up in Salford, somewhere like that. And it was just such a, it was a supply chain issue still hitting, but also you just felt this woman's personality. You were there, it wasn't mediated, you were kind of immersed.
Well, do you remember there was a viral clip on Twitter that caused that 24 hours before? That's why I did it so quickly. And everyone was getting really annoyed because they had broadcast a completely different interview to what they filmed. They cut out the Brexit stuff. So I said, well, Byline will go and actually listen to what she has to say. And
that's very important, yes. The BBC had interviewed her live, then when they and she'd complained about Brexit, and then when they'd replayed the clip later, they'd cut out the Brexit bit. And this is our job, partly, you know, it's not only saying what the newspapers don't say, what the TV doesn't tell you. And, you know, they're not bad people in the BBC, holding them to account, keeping them on their case, keeping on their tail.
But this is a running theme as well for both Byline Times and Byline TV, that the media itself, whether that be newspapers or broadcasters, is a massive power block. They have a lot of influence, and they're part of society, and just like, you know, our political class. You know, so it's something we need to keep scrutiny over. And I think, to be honest, Byline is one of the only outlets that holds other media outlets to account.
So moving on, we go to Germany next, I believe.
How does it feel as someone that lives in Berlin, seeing the reports in the UK that everything is the same with supply chain issues and fuel shortages?
Well, it's just not happening in my life, not anywhere around me. When I go shopping, yeah, all the shelves are full. There is no problem whatsoever. I can always get everything.
I can't understand. In Germany, you can buy everything around the clock. We have enough supply, and every day, 6 days a week. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 lorries a day. Yeah, they wrote the Brexit without thinking about the consequences, and the lorry drivers from Eastern Europe, now they got another jobs, and I don't believe that they will come back to Britain because they're not sure if they can work there.
I mean, our stocks are pretty full, as you can see. We've had maybe a few problems with Corona at the beginning of last year with, like everybody else, like toilet paper or whatnot. But otherwise, since then, we've had full shelves, very, very full shelves. No, absolutely no shortage, no.
So these are just the highlights, by the way, of our coverage over the last year. And that Germany one's very important because as Britain gets cut off from the EU, and I've noticed this with like books in translation, our foreign media, we've become more insulated and we don't understand how others see us. And that was just a great insight, wasn't it? They don't see sort of flag waving and sunlit uplands in Germany. They see what the hell is going on with the usually staid, sober, practical British.
Well, they were being blamed for a lot of it, and a lot of the politicians were actually saying that this was all of the problems we were having, supply chains, petrol shortage, was happening in Germany as well and happening in France. So I spoke to people outside petrol stations and I said, have you experienced any of this? And they laughed, all of them. They were like, what are you talking about? This is just Britain deflecting blame. They couldn't believe that the media in this country were putting up with it and not covering it.
There's always that great saying as well that often other people can see us better than we can see ourselves, and I think our exceptionalism and our sheer mendacity in recent years as a country, as in terms of its governance, it was certainly there for other, you know, for all those people. They could see it clearly.
Well, it's back to the old phrase, wasn't it, 100 years ago? Fog in the channel, continent cut off. Right, next clip, George.
I was in the sea for 5 days. Yes, 5 days and nights. And the the boat, I don't know, had a hole in it or something, so water would come in, and we were supposed to sink. I don't know, the shore guard, police, something like that, caught us, and that was it. Yes. And then we crossed the mountains from Italy to France, and that was pretty dangerous. It was really cool. And now it's even like more dangerous because it's snowing and it's really, really cool. Well, I was political member of an organization, and you can't have that against Iran. It's the punishment is like imprisonment for life, like execution and stuff like that. So I had to get out of there. You hear things, but you can't possibly imagine the darkness that's floating in the air. Every sorts of oppression and suppression and control. No one wants to live there. Always asking for more. I wanted a bigger world, and I was searching for it. Then at a point of my life, I realized it's English. By learning English, I'm gonna open a door to a big library, like a very, very huge library. And through English, I achieve a lot of things mentally, mostly. It helped me escape from the small circle I was in, and it sort of like popped the bubble for me.
Yeah, that was one of the most moving and emotional clips, I think, from this year interviews from our team. Was it Ollie and Louis went to that? Caden and Georgia trained up mini themselves to film that. And we'd had all these, didn't we, this fear of migrants coming over the channel, this awful, another invasion, you know. There's, throughout the summer, Farage, then Sky, and then the BBC had been in the channel, always creating this threat of the other invasion. And then sadly, 31 drowned. And then you, your team, had the, you know, bravery and the truth-seekingness, if you like, to go and interview these people. And they're not this threat. These are people who value our way of life. Nearly all of them, when they get here, 70% turn out to be genuine asylum seekers, like my grandfather. And I think it's very important, there's another way, is to antidote this monstering of migrants, which is was for a few months at the end of the year, once they lost the other culture wars, the new theme of Priti Patel and Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has been. And we had this awful tragedy where 31 people died after their boat capsized, crossing the channel to Britain. And that was, again, another moment that really prompted a lot of debate about how we see these people. Predominantly that, you know, in the rhetoric that politicians are whipping up, they're not seen as people, they're seen as, you know, invaders trying to take advantage of Britain, coming here for hotel stays, benefits, for reasons that they shouldn't be. So, yeah, I think this film was really important in sort of presenting the human face to it all, which is completely lost, really.
So how does this come about? You know, why are we monstering minorities and migrants and things like that? What has the Conservative Party become? And so that was one of our best sort of studio interviews, wasn't it, Hardeep? I mean, the great, you know, former Conservative Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, talking with a Conservative columnist and journalist, Peter Oborne. And this is what they had to say about the state of the current Conservative Party.
Johnson has appeared to be a liberal conservative because well, lots of people thought he was. But when it comes to the crunch, it's much easier for him to go in the route of being a populist demagogue than to actually say, oh, I stand up for liberal conservative values, because he hasn't got any policies, and therefore that's a direction in which he's going to be prodded. I bumped into a number of members of my old constituency association, who obviously wanted many of them to get rid of me and supported Brexit. And they were incandescently angry about Johnson's behaviour. And it clearly, the trigger point which had tipped them into open anger had been the Patterson affair.
Is there a hope, therefore, of you rejoining the Conservative Party at any point in the future?
I would like to rejoin the Conservative Party because philosophically, whilst I don't always feel in tune with any political party, it's probably the political party which in its traditional form I've always felt more in tune with than any others. I'm certainly not going to be able to rejoin it as long as Johnson is Prime Minister, and I think I have to go beyond that and say I would also like some evidence that it is moving away from what I would call Johnsonism. And on that, we have to be realistic. I fear that some of the temptations and drivers that have created this, to my mind, a monster.
Well, we hope viewers found that just as enlightening as we did in the studio. It was a really, really interesting interview with both Dominic Grieve and Peter O'Bourne. But it's time to look at the very last highlight of the year.
If he was to walk in here, he wouldn't walk out. And that's the truth. It's not a threat, it's a promise. I can't stand a lad.
I just don't trust him. No.
Partly because of the sleaze problem, partly because of the government's policy with regard to the cap on social support when people have to go into retirement.
All based on what we've heard the last couple of weeks in terms of the party that they allegedly had at 10 Downing Street. The whole of the country was on lockdown. We're adhering to the rules last year. We missed loved ones, and purely for that fact, I'm pretty angry about it, to be fair. So they're not getting my vote.
Where do I begin? Well, parties obviously lying to people. You know, the fact that they have really done very little. Well, I don't know where to begin. It's such a long list.
I haven't totally made my mind up, but it won't be Conservative.
So one thing, this gives me hope, watching the amazing work you've done, and you've done, Hardeep, is that by the time you get to the North Shropshire by-election, we feel, not just ours, obviously other people's work, is beginning to come home to the voters. They realise this is not a government for them. We now know they're having these parties. There was a picture came out last night of a garden party in number 10, and somebody else showed a picture of, in their local park, all the benches covered up. You couldn't even sit on a park bench. And I have this sort of them and us feeling about it. We're being divided. But Caelan, so tell us, about how many miles did you travel this year?
So for all of this, it was something like 4,000 miles, 7 counties, 3 countries. It was Northern Ireland, and we went to, with John's film, went to Italy. It took us basically everywhere. But it was worth it because we managed to get all of this from the ground, straight from the source, in a way that we really haven't seen anyone else in the media replicate or do in the past. I think it's our audience have, loved what they've seen. And it's been a really, really good way of bringing news to people directly so that they can make up their own minds.
We do read all your comments, even those about my shirt button not being done up properly. I've done it up today. And we do take on board, and this is the key thing about Byline TV, like Byline Times, we're focused on you. Why? Because you fund us. The only way we can survive is you, unlike a hedge fund or an advertiser, helping us maintain the studio, keeping Caelan on the road, those 4,000 miles. So at the end of this quite momentous year in many ways, with an even more momentous year perhaps coming up, I think we'd all agree, do, if you can, support us by going to patreon.com/Byline TV, become a director, become a member, all kinds of benefits. We can talk to you directly, and the same on YouTube. If you possibly can, just help us keep going. But that's my last word, Hardeep. What would you like to say to our great audience before we go?
Wow, I just want to say a really, really big thank you. I mean, we do always say this, but we couldn't do it without you. It really is your TV station, Byline TV, just as Byline Times is your newspaper. And it is, both the people-powered alternatives in all senses, whether it be the reporters and the journalists who work on them or those who make it happen through donations and funding. So we're in it together, and I know politicians over the years have said that in various ways over the year, but when it comes to what we do here, we really are in it together. We feel that, it's palpable whenever we sit on this sofa, and we hope that you feel that too. So thank you so much for sticking with us on this part of our journey, but it is only the beginning. So do join us again in the new year for more Byline TV. Thank you very much.